It's day 278. It's also February 8th, 2020. And we are in St. Mary's, Georgia. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description. Trekking across that Florida Panhandle, also called the Emerald Coast, is pretty cool. It stretches from the Alabama border to the Apalachicola River, offering a unique blend of southern charm and beach paradise. An area significantly impacted by the Gulf activity on one side, while being sufficiently far from the Atlantic Ocean to avoid its effects. The area also has access to multiple major metropolitan areas in 3 states. Florida, of course, and its Pensacola area and the 500,000 folks there. Alabama offers up Mobile, and the over 400,000 folks that call that region home. And if folks are up for a bit more of a drive, well, there's the Atlanta metro area here in Georgia. It's a doable drive if you need access to over 5 million humans and everything that comes with that. And the Panhandle has plenty to offer for those folks that want wide open spaces, small town American life, and some pretty awesome weather. On the flip side, this exposure to all that water means that many of the towns I've driven through and read about have experienced direct hits by hurricanes 3 to 4 times in just the last decade. So I guess the word resilient applies here as well. It definitely applies to the folks that call the area home. And the last 100 or so miles into St. Mary's was spent zigzagging back and forth across that Florida-Georgia state line. And I'm not going to lie, it's pretty dang funny listening to my confused phone randomly blurt out every few minutes, "Welcome to Georgia. Welcome to Florida. Welcome to Georgia. No, welcome to Florida." Oh, and another funny story. We'd stopped for some shut-eye at a rest stop in a place called Lee, Florida. Dougie and I were out early the next morning for our first walk. It was still pretty dark outside. We really only had the benefit of park lights as we wandered around a grassy area that was surrounded by wooded space. And we came across a rock, a branch, something. We couldn't really see what it was. But when Dougie got within about a foot of it, whatever it was sprang to life and waddled off into those woods. Turns out, we just met our very first armadillo. Dougie lunged towards it as I, in a sudden burst of panic, jumped backwards and drug him in the opposite direction. And Dougie was sad to watch it waddle away. I, on the other hand, was just relieved it was going in the other direction. Every day's a learning experience. Now our walks can even be more exciting. We'd always had the chance of stumbling across the random coyote, rabbit, squirrel, raccoon, or even neighborhood cat on the streets of East Tacoma. And across the deserts of Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, we'd learn to keep an eye out above for whatever feathered critters might be lurking. In Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, well, they taught us that some pretty pesky rattlers might be in store under any interesting-looking rock. And now, we can put armadillos on that list. We spent the rest of that day covering the 130 miles or so between Lee, Florida, and St. Mary's, Georgia. We've had St. Mary's in our sights for a while now. And why? Well, quick backstory here. I'd first be introduced to the area coming on like 20 years ago. It was 2002, and I just purchased a brand new Saab 9.3 Viggen convertible. And of all the cars I've owned to date, hands down, my favorite. Saab, in 1999, had taken their popular 9.3 platform and beefed it up. More than a little. Most all the way around. More horsepower, higher torque, stiffer and more responsive suspension, upgrades to the ECU and the clutch systems, higher capacity air intake coolers, higher flowing exhaust, 17-inch wheels, upgraded the braking system, and even lowered the overall stance of the car to increase performance and provide a more aggressive look. Saab went on to wrap it all up in that 9.3 skin, adding a few more subtle accents, both inside and out, in a way that more subtly announced that this Saab was more than just a little different. They called the limited edition car the Viggen, which was in honor of their aircraft heritage and a nod to the Saab AJ-37 Viggen combat aircraft, a fleet of planes that would be utilized by the Swedish Air Force from the early 1970s until around 2005, I think I read, when the last unit was retired. And the word Viggen? Well, it kind of loosely translates to thunderbolt in English. Saab produced only around 5,000 of these cars between 99 and 02, with somewhere between 300 and 700 each year making it to the U.S. And I think that was one of the most exciting aspects of the car for me. It wasn't common. In fact, pretty rare. There are some 280 million cars registered in the U.S., and around 12 million new cars registered each year. So I felt pretty confident that in a sea of cars, I wouldn't often see another Viggen. And making the experience even more fun, included in the purchase of each Viggen, was a 2-day driver's course at a place called Road Atlanta. Saab called it the Viggen Flight Academy. And I was so excited to get this 2-day opportunity to spend time on an actual speedway with professional driving instructors, really learning how to drive and safely enjoy the super cool car I had just bought. And not to mention, meet a few other folks that had discovered and were enjoying their Viggens all across the country. Anyway, during the planning process and scheduling of the trip, I realized that this would be my first opportunity to spend time in a place called Georgia. And the perfect time to take an extended vacation and do some exploring. So I did. I'd fly into Atlanta the weekend before the driving class, and as expected, had a blast on those courses with those drivers, learning. I even got my graduation certificate from the Viggen Flight Academy and a badge acknowledging my accomplishments. Or, more accurately, the accomplishments of those professional drivers that were in the passenger seat, most each and every mile through those courses. And after the course, I rented a car and hit the road. And I'd spend over a week and a ton of time behind the wheel of that rental car checking out everything from the Smoky Mountains to Tennessee, Nashville, and the Grand Ole Opry. But on one road trip in particular, I'd find myself immersed in a magical place called Savannah. And just 100 or so miles from there, a couple of other super cool finds. A place called St. Mary's and Jekyll Island. And I was hooked. I could picture myself living here and having the opportunity to absorb it every day. I told myself for sure I'd be back. But then, life did what life does. And before I knew it, 18 years had passed, with no follow-up visits to Georgia. Until now. And driving into St. Mary's this time, for some reason, I thought about that first drive into Rangeley, Colorado a few months back, when I realized if you're driving into Rangeley, it's probably because you're going to Rangeley, a town that's not really on the way to much anywhere else. And how the same could be applied to St. Mary's. This place is even more so. A drive-to. It's not a drive-by. But different from Rangeley in the respect that you can drive by or through Rangeley and keep going. But here in St. Mary's, if your aim is to simply pass through the town and keep going without turning around, well, you better have a boat, because there's going to be some water involved. A lot of water. It's also a town that at one point in time would claim its rank as the 6th largest town in Georgia. A town that Union troops would do their best to burn down during the Civil War. But nature would intervene with the rainstorm the townspeople had prayed for, and would save a good portion of the town and an iconic and the oldest Presbyterian church in the state. The First Presbyterian Church of St. Mary's. Built in 1808 and has been in continuous operation for over 212 years. St. Mary's is also home to one of the oldest cemeteries in Georgia, the Oak Grove Cemetery, the one where more Revolutionary fighters would be laid to rest than any other in the state. Second in the country, for that matter, behind only Arlington Cemetery in Virginia. It was becoming pretty clear, early on, that we were surrounded by a good many firsts. A lot of onlys. Just a lot of history. And I knew immediately, this is going to be fun. The town's located in the low country of Georgia, the southeast corner, not far from the Florida state line. It's characterized by its flat terrain and proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. It's part of the state's coastal plain region, which consists of fertile, sandy soils and lots of rivers and marshlands weaving their way out into that Atlantic Ocean. And it's another part of the country, first discovered in the 16th century by the Spanish. In this region, Spanish explorers would encounter the Timucua people. The Timucua were a Native American people who lived in northeast and north-central Florida and southeast Georgia. They were the largest indigenous group in this area, consisting of about 35 chiefdoms and many of those leading thousands of people. The name is believed to have originated from the Timucuan word Timagona, or Timagua. But the Spanish would later adopt the term Timucua. And it doesn't appear, or at least I couldn't find, a direct translation, but it seems the word refers to the other people, or a people that were somehow different. And here in Georgia, the Timucua territory stretched from the Altamaha River and Cumberland Island down here to the St. Mary's River area. A people that were known for complex societies and cultural traditions, like intricate tattoos and wearing deerskins and antlers while hunting. I'd also learned that their unique DNA and documentation of their language lead us to believe that they were amongst the oldest tribes in the region, and their language itself may have been one of the oldest on the entire North American continent. Even their artwork, in the form of trinkets, jewelry, and pottery, date back over 5,000 years, making it some of the oldest on the continent. And here would be the first time on this adventure that I would read of the extinction of an entire people. The Timucua, a strong culture, numbering in the thousands, had thrived throughout the region for hundreds of years, and their ancestors for thousands of years before that, only to be brought to an end by the arrival of the European explorers and the diseases they brought with them. Within a century, the Timucuan people would be ravaged by diseases that they had no natural immunity to. Smallpox, measles, and influenza would all have catastrophic effects on their population. I mean, come on, it wasn't like they could run up the road to get a smallpox vaccination. That wouldn't even be invented for nearly 100 years after the last Timucuan had perished. And then pile on attempts at enslavement by Europeans and the conflicts that would arise over territorial disputes, and you have the perfect recipe. The recipe that resulted in the extinction of an entire culture. A people that for thousands of years were the only people in this region of Florida and Georgia. It's a lot to absorb, to begin to understand fully. No way, I don't know that I will ever be able to understand fully, but to understand on a deeper level the impact that European discovery, exploration, and settlement would have on the indigenous peoples of North America, simply by setting foot on the soils of North America. Everywhere from coast to coast, they had already begun killing tens of thousands of Native Americans, and not even knowing it, way before they picked up a gun and shot them, before they began rounding them up and relegating them to reservations or enslaving them. They were already killing them, simply by introducing them to disease. And that settlement all across the country would march on. Over here, by the 18th century, British presence would be introduced and would later evolve into American settlement. And as a result of that settlement, the 19th century would bring significant growth to St. Mary's as it grew into a busy seaport. The town would continue to evolve into the 20th century as it became a strategic military location. So here we are, in a town of 18,000, a town named for the Spanish mission Santa Maria, a town that was officially chartered in 1787, then recognized by the Georgia legislature in 1792, and finally incorporated in 1802. A town that would be occupied by the British during the War of 1812, in their attempt to disrupt U.S. control of the area's coastline. A town that would be occupied yet again by the enemy during the American Civil War. But this time, the enemy trying to burn their town down were other Americans, the ones clad in those Union uniforms. Man, like I said, there's a lot to dig into here. But our first day in St. Mary's would be spent driving around the town, refamiliarizing myself with what I had remembered, which was very little, by the way, from those 18 years or so ago. We'd also be taught another lesson, or not really taught another lesson, but the same lesson yet again. Because, this thick-skulled nutball has to be taught something more than once. Just as we had discovered in those miles behind us, St. Mary's is another place you don't just roll into in January and expect to find a spot in an RV park. We'd learn that this part of Georgia and North Florida are actually considered the Arizona, if you will, of the East Coast. So yeah, January, pretty popular. And while I wasn't exactly surprised to learn that the super cool Crooked River State Park, RV park, was full, it was a bit of a disappointment to learn that one of the only other options, a place called the Big Wheel RV Park, was currently undergoing some kind of maintenance or repair work, and they had nothing available either. And with the day coming to a close, we had passed by a 2-acre parcel of property for sale on our way into the Crooked River State Park. So on our way out, I pulled into that open space, just across the road from the Kings Bay Naval Yard, and I called the number on the for sale sign. And that's how we met Jim. Super nice guy. I explained that we just rolled into town without reservations and needed to set up camp for a couple days until we got situated, and was most definitely happy to throw a few bucks his way for the privilege of parking on his 2-acre parcel. No problem, he said. I'll swing by in a few and check on you. I'm just up the road. And sure enough, a few minutes later, as Dougie and I were finishing up an evening walk, a big silver GMC pickup rolled up, and Jim waved. As he walked up, he handed me a slip of paper with a phone number on it and said, "Call Sharon. She doesn't really advertise much, but she's got a spot just up the road here with a few RV hookups on it. Now, I'm not sure what she's got available, but she'll help you out if she can." "Awesome," I said as I thanked him. Jim wouldn't take any money. He just kept saying, "What for? It's just sitting here, for sale. It's just space. Use it if you need it. And call me anytime if you need help with anything else." As Jim waved and rolled out, another pickup rolled up, and a young guy hopped out of the truck and asked, "You lose a dog?" "Not me," I said, but I quickly opened the door of the RV for a quick peek just to make sure Dougie was still in there. The young guy went on. "Neighbor up the street says she's seen a dog she's never seen before run past her house. I thought at first it was mine, but they're all accounted for. I'm just out checking to see who might be short a dog. She said it looked young, scared, and lost." I told him again the only one I had was accounted for, but thanks for checking, and I'll keep an eye out. He, just like Jim, waved and rolled off. And there we were, on our new little temporary 2-acre home, for a day or two anywho. And we even had neighbors. Neighbors that cared a bit about things like strangers in town needing a place to park for a night or two, and neighbors that might have even misplaced a puppy, and other neighbors helping to find that puppy. I left Sharon a voicemail that night. She called me back first thing the next day, so day 2 in St. Mary's was spent settling into a quiet little RV park just 2 streets up from where we'd pulled off onto that 2-acre lot. I paid Sharon 3 months' rent up front. I didn't know exactly how long we'd be here, but I'd learned enough and seen enough in just our first day to know that we're going to hang out here for a while. The first couple of days under Vasilando's awning, Dougie on one side, Billie on the other, cup of coffee on the side table. Each day I considered getting out and doing some more exploring, learning. But then neighbors would walk, drive, or ride by, wave, and stop to chat. I found quickly here, as with many places we've been, that when you roll in with Washington state plates on a 32-year-old RV, not to mention Billie and Dougie happy to say hi, it is not difficult to strike up a conversation. Well, mostly I was just answering questions. Or just sitting here reading a good book. That's pretty awesome, too. And within those first couple of days, our sunny and warm welcome to Georgia would come to an end. The 70 and 80-degree days would quickly give way to a couple of nights of freezing weather, with daytime temps barely cracking 60. And they do not like the term frost around here. Folks would tell me current frosty temps mark the first time in 2 years it's dropped below freezing at night, and they immediately recall 2010, when a frost would cost northern Florida and southern Georgia nearly $1 billion in lost crops. But I think my favorite news bulletin was when South Florida issued a falling iguana warning. Yeah, you laugh. I did. But it's serious business around here when temps drop below 50 degrees, rendering the reptiles dormant. They then fall from trees in their dormant state, littering walkways with a new type of hazard. Reporters caution that you should not attempt to rescue or help them. They're fine, and they'll return to normal behavior as the temps return to normal. Leave it to us, I thought, to land in a spot where reptiles can quite literally fall from the sky. As I got out here and there for some exploring, I discovered the St. Mary's Submarine Museum with tons of good stuff in relation to the local submarine history. It would also teach me that St. Mary's is home to the first Coast Guard station in the country. And the Tabby Ruins, a rather nondescript local historical marker that upon first blush, well, it seems less than interesting. But upon closer inspection and reading, becomes a fascinating structure that dates back to the early 1800s and marks yet another example of what man was capable of doing in a time well before today's technologies. Tabby is a term used to describe a construction method used by the Spanish dating back to the 1500s, and later adopted by the English in northern Florida and southern Georgia. Buildings were built using a hand-mixed mortar utilizing the abundant supply of oyster shells in the area. The shells would be burnt over an open flame overnight in order to create a lime of sorts. This would then be mixed with sand, water, and ash. This particular building became the first operational sugar mill in the state, using processes developed in Louisiana, but later, after a change in ownership, it would evolve into a starch factory. Today, the walls erected nearly 200 years ago stand almost as proudly as they did upon completion. Well, minus the roof. And standing in the middle of these walls, studying the detail, thinking through how they were built, and then looking just across the street at an entrance to the Naval Submarine Station at Kings Bay, man, there couldn't be any more of a contrast between the technology of a nuclear submarine today versus what industrious pioneers built by hand some 200 years earlier, using a process that was used all across the region for hundreds of years before that. And it turns out that 10,327 miles, 9 months, and 15 states later, settling into a bit of a routine for a stretch is even more relaxing and welcomed than I would have thought. And one of my favorites each day, and still, is during walks with Dougie when we pass those alligator warning signs again. It's kind of just like the Be Bear Aware signs in Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, even Florida. Those signs are everywhere, and we've yet to see a bear. Nor have we seen one of these alligator thingies here, and we are totally good with that. And it also makes me laugh that whenever I ask the local folks about gators and do I really have to watch out for them that much? After a shrug, the conversation quickly shifts to their favorite gator tail recipe. Evidently, it's more likely that I eat an alligator tail than an alligator actually attacking me. So I'm kind of feeling like at this point, in this neck of the woods, neither will actually happen. But who knows? It seems lemon pepper gator tail is definitely the front runner when it comes to comparing recipes. And yes, I am assured by locals that it does indeed taste like chicken. And one evening, I was digging around for some more info on St. Mary's, and in doing so, I came across a video titled Hometown Georgia, St. Mary's. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's a pretty awesome video. Whether it's watching a young fisherman attempting to follow in his papa's footsteps, to a 90-year-old lifelong resident hitting the Hardee's for a burger and then hanging out on the waterfront. It was nice listening to locals describe their St. Mary's. A favorite quote from the video was a young lady that said, "I was not born in the South, but I got here as soon as I could." I think tomorrow I'll hop in the car after the morning walk with Dougie and venture out a little further. I need to check out places like Cumberland Island, Jekyll Island, and Fernandina Beach. And probably a lot more. I'm not for sure which direction I'll head tomorrow. But wherever it is, I wonder what we'll learn there. Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.